giving you useful and practical tips to help you make more money selling travel. This is the Art of Selling Travel Podcast, and here to guide you through it all, your host, Glenda Beagle.
Welcome back. I am so absolutely stoked to share this episode with you. It is one that I've been waiting to record for quite a while here. And it's so much fun. Now, I'm going to talk about Lemonade Day. If you've never heard of Lemonade Day, I really encourage you to look it up. And more importantly, see if there's an organization in your community that might benefit from bringing it in. It's something that started, I believe, in the Houston area. Now it's all across North America and beyond sort of thing. And it is so much fun. I've been, the very first year our community was participating, I attended as a participant. I tried all the lemonade stands. And then ever since then, I've actually been one of the judges. And this year, I actually got to attend Lemmy University, which is the program that they actually put on for the kids, get to do it in person. And I got to talk to the kids outside of their lemonade stands. Okay, like I said, I'm super excited, so I'm probably talking really fast. But let's go back to the beginning. What is Lemonade Day? Well, Lemonade Day is this program that's designed to teach children. I believe the youngest that was in our group was like 4 years old, all the way up to like 17, 18 years old, how to run a business. It's done through the concept of a lemonade stand, but it is so much more. You know, when they participate in this, they actually get this entire workbook and they're able to do it as a part of an app or on like an actual printed out book. And it's fantastic. So there's prizes. Of course, there's money to be made, you know, different things like that. But the best part is these kids are getting an education in entrepreneurship. And actually, so are their parents. I think that's probably for me, the most exciting part is watching the parents go through some of this. And I'm not going to lie, my kids are super jealous because nothing like this existed back when they were kids. And that they just said, like, why was this not around? But it is now. And if it's not in your community, check it out. See if there's a way that there's a group in your community that can do it, because it is just so much fun. Okay, so I was saying that there's prizes. There is. It's broken into 3 categories: best tasting, best booth, and entrepreneur of the year. So when they put forward everything, they've got to come up with their own recipe. Some of them are super creative. I'm going to talk about that in a minute, about how creative. Sometimes it's creative good. Sometimes it's creative bad. Sometimes it's just not creative at all. But then they also have the best booth. Now, this is also interesting too, because, you know, and this is where you can tell where the parents got involved and things like that. Some of them think it's who can spend the most amount of money to set up their booth. I'm going to tell you, this year, when I did the judging, it was not the ones that spent the most amount. It was not the most lavish booth. It was not all these sorts of things. But I'm going to tell you why we picked the winner that we did in our area. And then, of course, the entrepreneur of the year. There are so many factors that go into that as well. And on face value, or, you know, on the surface level, the one that got selected as the entrepreneur of the year in our area is not the one I necessarily would have thought of. But as I was explaining what she did, everybody else just at the table just looked at me and they said, I think that's an entrepreneur. And I burst out laughing and I said, oh yeah, I totally missed it. But we're going to talk about that in a minute too. So I want to tell you what all these kids have to do. So first off, like I said, they go through their Lemmy University. They have to write up a business plan. They have to get permits and leases. They learn about what it means to have an investor and the fact that they have to pay their investor back with interest. Yes, interest. How many people going into business would know so much more if they understood what it meant to actually have to pay their investor interest? Heck, how many people would know so much more if they understood what compound interest on their credit cards meant? Anyhow, I move on. They also had to do a marketing plan. They had to have a cost structure. They needed to know what did each glass of lemonade cost them? They also had to kind of estimate how many glasses they're going to sell versus how much they had to create. There were so many different things. Then they had to, once they had their cost structure of what it cost them to make, then they had to decide what they wanted to sell it for and what was their markup, what was their margins, things like that. Then they had to actually make the sale. They had to go through the process of actually selling their lemonade. And then at the end, they had to debrief it. There's a place in there where they go through, talk about what worked, what didn't. But, some of the things that we judged them on was, did they sell more than just lemonade? Did they bring in additional product lines? What did they do for creative? What did they do to market themselves? What did they do that was different? What did they do that went above and beyond just doing it? We also judged them on their customer service. Did they connect with their clients? Did they talk to them? Did they greet them? Did they ask them to buy? I've got a funny story on that one too. But as I go through the book here, I thought this was really interesting because they kind of highlight what's an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur is a person who starts a business with the purpose of making a profit. I love that, because how many people, and perhaps you're one of them, that's went into selling travel because you just love to travel. You just love to sell travel. Being a business owner, according to this, is selling the goods or services for the sake of earning a profit. I'm going to say there's a lot of business owners that are in the process of selling goods or services, but not necessarily for the sake of making a profit. And an entrepreneur starts a business for the purpose of making a profit. And I think that to me was one of the biggest lessons that came out of this. Is what you're doing with the sole intention of making a profit? Because if you're an independent travel advisor, if you're an agency owner, if you are somebody who's doing this, not as an employee who punches a clock, punches in, punches out, and gets paid a wage, then you're doing this for a profit. And it's really important that we look at our businesses in a way of, how are we going to do this with the purpose of making a profit? It's also really important to remember that making a profit is not sleazy. It is not wrong. It is the purpose of being an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur's sole purpose is starting a business to make a profit. So it also talks in here, and this is what I love. It's true that business owners can make a lot of money, but they also take on a lot of risks and responsibilities. And, I think that was such a pivotal thing for them to be teaching these kids, because I hear it all the time. Oh, must be nice. I think everybody deserves a raise. Look how much the top guys are making. Well, if you're an independent and you are in charge of deciding what it is that you're going to make, you're doing that by putting something on risk. You're doing that by going out and taking that risk, by actually putting something on the line. And it's really important for you to understand it's okay to then get rewarded, especially if you've had a big risk in place. So one of the very first things that they do with these kids is they tell them they need to set a goal. So this is one of the things I really love about it. There's lots of things I really loved about Lemonade Day. But the number one thing is that they have to set a goal. And it's their spending amount and their spending goal. So I want to spend, and it's an amount to buy whatever it is. So what is something you would like to buy with the profit you make from your lemonade business? So that's something that I really liked. They talked to the kids about, you're going to spend some, you're going to save some, and you're going to share some. So every one of these kids had a philanthropy project associated with it. I will say, for the most part, the animal shelter made out very well off of Lemonade Day. But the idea is that the kids were to then share part of what their income was. And in fact, for a lot of them, it was explained to do 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, So if the kids, after expenses, after reimbursing their investor, made $300, they'd get to spend $100, they'd get to save $100, and they would share $100. So these kids were on cloud nine, because as you can imagine, a 7 or an 8-year-old making $300 over and above their expenses was amazing to them. I will say some of these kids made a lot more than that. but they were very, very on it. So some of the things these kids had to do is they had to figure out, what is it going to cost them to run this business? Where are they going to be located? There was a lot of factors that go into choosing their location. Why did they choose the location they chose? They had to go and get a lease from whatever location it was. Some of them were set up outside of a restaurant. Some of them were set up right on Main Street in front of a different building or this or that. Some of them were set up close to the public library. There were a handful of them that were set up in their own yards. What was their reason for choosing the location that they chose? And that was a question that as judges, we got to ask them, and each one of them had a different reason. They all had a reason that made sense to them. Perhaps it was a good choice. Perhaps it wasn't, and that was for them to kind of find out. In terms of the taste, so that's the first one I want to talk about. This was the first year that I was, as a judge, that I didn't judge the taste, which was so nice. It actually was done in our community. It was done by the local city hall. They set it up inside of their staff lunchroom, and it was actually their staff. So that was the beauty of it, because then none of them have met the kids. So they were strictly just judging a number, if you will. And so from there, the first one, or the number one, was chosen. And then they got to display their ribbon the whole day to say that we are the number one tasting lemonade in all of town. And they got to have that for all throughout. The next thing that we judged was the best booth. So this particular booth that we chose this year, it was not the fanciest. And I'm okay with that. Because to me, they ran with the branding. They were tied into their local jiu-jitsu martial arts studio here in town. So they had actually set up just outside of that business. And so they branded their lemonade stand. And I don't recall the name of it off the top of my head. It was like Jiu-Jitsu Lemonade, something like that. It was tied into the name, but all of their flavors were tied to 5 different belt colors. And so to me, that was really cool. They tied in their branding from beginning to end. The flavors of their lemonade were tied into the colors of the different belt. Now, when I say that some of them were win flavors and some of them were not, in this particular one, they had 5 different. And my favorite part was the youngest brother in the group. I want to say he was 5, maybe. And he was a pistol. He was just a blast. And so I said to him, have you tried all the flavors yet? And he's like, no, not yet. He's like, but the black belt, it stinks. You gotta laugh when a kid is just so brutally honest. So then I said to him, okay, well, if you haven't tried them all, which one's your favorite? He's like, it's the black. And then he giggled. And I said, I don't think I believe you. He's like, trust me, it's better. He goes, it's made with charcoal so that it cleans out your innards and it's healthy for you. It's the best. And I said, I still don't believe you. Now, the other part of me was thinking that depending how much charcoal was in there and the fact I'd been drinking lemonade all day, my system probably had all it needed. So we went with, I believe, a strawberry lemonade that day. Yeah. But the thing is, though, is that they had a red belt, a purple belt, an orange belt, a black belt, and then I believe it was a brown belt, something like that. Anyhow, they had a different belt color, a different color for each belt that they represented. Different flavor went with each of those. And it was just so cool how they tied it all in based on the location that they chose. There was so many things that went into that it just absolutely was fantastic. The entrepreneur of the year, to me, was probably the most unexpected because I remember going to theirs first and they were actually set up in their home. And to me, I quite often, I'm not as much of a fan if you do it in your home because I feel like maybe you didn't go all the way through the processes. But this particular little entrepreneur had made something called garden fairy wands. And they are these beautiful glittery beads up this great big long stick that she's made with a glittery doorknob on the top that you stick inside of your flower pots. And they're a fairy wand to bring good luck and good harmony to your garden. And they were, first off, they were glitter. So they were beautiful. But this was the key to me. They said, I think we might actually start a real business off of this because we've gotten so many orders. We actually got bulk orders first thing this morning, but they didn't want to wipe us out of all of our stock because they didn't want us to be without stock the rest of the day. So they placed orders to be filled next week. Hello, this was a lemonade stand. And out of that, they created an entirely different business. They created an entirely different opportunity. You know, the other thing that I totally loved about this one is that she shouted out all of her sponsors, because while the kids had to have startup money or whatever to get going, they also had the opportunity to work with some of our local businesses who did amazing things for them for sponsorship. And this booth did the very best job of thanking her sponsors and thanking those that helped her get to where she needed to be. And, you know, when you're in business, we never do it alone. We're never completely on our own. There's always going to be somewhere, something, someone who's going to help us. And I think it's so important that we recognize when we get a hand, you know, a hand up, not a hand out, but a hand up, or somebody that gives us guidance, somebody that shows us something that we didn't know before. But I absolutely loved the fact that to them, they were going to create this new business. Now, the other key piece to this Entrepreneur of the Year, she was a total introvert. And she was so outside of her element in having to talk to the people and other such. But she still did it. Was she a little bit more timid than perhaps the little boy that wanted to sell me his black lemonade and told me it stunk, but it was super, super, super good? Yeah, there was a different personality, but she still showed up. She showed up no matter how nervous, how timid, how shy she was. And the more she got going, because when we first got there, she was real shy. But the more she started to talk and the more she could share her story and tell us about what she was doing, the more she started to open and just get going. And by the time one of the facilitators had stopped by there a couple hours after we'd been there, she said she was just nattering away. And I love it. You know, we all start out somewheres in our business. You know, maybe we're painfully shy. I know it's probably shocking for you to hear, especially if we've met in person already. I am an introvert. Like, if you see me at a public event, I remember being at the Asta River Cruise convention this past year. And I was at the very back of the room with my back up against the wall. And somebody was like, oh, come over, come sit. You know, we've got a chair. But that meant walking past all these people. I literally sat on the floor with my back against the wall, rather than just to envelop inside of a crowd that I didn't know anybody. I am that kind of introvert. And sometimes it's to my own detriment. Perhaps I would have met more people. But then when I do get into my element, I can go, I can fly, I can just take off. And it's really important that if you're somebody who struggles with that, that you just know you're not the only one out there. There's other people out there going through the same thing you're going through, feeling the same way you're feeling, but they're just getting up and doing it anyways. So some of the other things that I heard at Lemonade Day, I'm just going to grab my notes here because I just thought it was absolutely fantastic. First off, I remember the day that I was at LemmyU, and the facilitator said, does anybody have any questions? And this little girl put up her hand, and I don't know, she was maybe 7 years old. And they said, yeah, what's your question? She goes, why are there boys here? Why do boys think they're allowed to own a business? And it just cracked me up on every level, because then one of the boys stood up, because boys can own businesses too, haven't you heard? And I loved it. First off, the innocence of children. Second off, I love the fact that that this conversation is almost reversed from what it would have been, you know, at other times and whatnot. But also too, I loved the fact that both of them stood in their power, and both of them just, you know, we're going to own a business and we're going to go toe to toe and we're going to win. So a couple of the tips from the kids. So personal recommendations. So remember how I said the one boy told me that the black belt drink stunk, but it was his favorite one. Personal recommendations go a long ways. When you're selling travel to your client, if your client doesn't quite know what to do, or they're kind of in that in between, you saying, if it was me, understanding we're in completely different phases of life, or, that we're not the same person, I would probably lean to this one over that one for this reason. Now, to just straight up say, choose this isn't going to work. But to say to your client, these are two really good options. If it was me, I would probably do the full transit through the canal rather than going in, turning around and coming back. But I also understand that if you have a limited window of time, it might be better, easier, faster to just do a partial transit, because that's only a 10-day sailing versus a 14-night sailing, and having those conversations, giving them the personal recommendation, putting some context into it. Go to the customer. Don't wait for them to come to you. If they go to the car door, there was one 2 years ago, and they were in the contest again this year. They set up outside of a local feed store, if you will. It was a country type store, garden supplies, cattle feed, feed for animals, things like that. Anyhow, they were set up outside of it, and they cracked me up because they would be, do you want some lemonade? And they would just scream it for the people driving by to hear them. Trust me, you could not go near these girls without hearing them. And if you said, oh, no, I'm just going to go get my stuff, I'll get you on the way back, those girls watched for you. And as you were coming back from the front doors, they were like, don't forget your lemonade. Are you ready to buy it now? They were right there, and they were there to make sure that their clients saw them. You got to make sure your clients know that you're open for business, because based on where they were located, they were kind of out of sight, out of mind. But when you hear, do you want to buy some lemonade? Suddenly you can feel like you want to buy some lemonade. Another tip that they gave, it pays to give sometimes. Not everybody had cash and expecting to buy, so a free cup could pay dividends. That was one of the tips from another little girl that had participated the year before, is that based on where her location was, she didn't always have cash. She was actually beside a very popular franchise coffee drive-through place here in Canada, and she was in kind of the same parking lot. And so she would, again, holler at them in the cars in the drive-through to see if they wanted lemonade. And they would say, oh, sweetie, I'm so sorry, I don't have any money on you. And she'd say, you know what? That's okay. I want you to have lemonade anyways. And so she would give them a cup of lemonade. Well, when they went through that drive-through, or they would go home and come back, they would come back and they would hand her a $20 bill to tell her how much they appreciated what she did for them. That's where having your lead magnet, doing a consultation, or even just the discovery call creates this world of reciprocity. We want to make sure that we're not just constantly taking from our clients, but instead we're giving back to them as well. I've heard it so many times. Oh, you can't put that out there because people just take your information and they'll run with it. That's a very hard way to live. When you build that connection with people and you treat them human to human, yes, there are still going to be a handful of people that are going to take advantage of that. But overall, there's going to be people that'll say, wow, you get me. I want to work with you. When you're working in sales, the whole point is to make connections with humans. We don't want to do transactions. We want to build relationships. Now, relationships does not mean that you're going for coffee with and you're going to become BFFs and this, that, the other. You're getting to know the people. People want to buy from people, but they also want to buy from people who make them feel seen and heard. They want to make sure that you actually get them, that you know what it is that their struggles are, that you see them, hear them, and understand them. That's what people want. It's also important that you understand those costs. That was something that came up because when I would ask the kids, because part of my job was to ask them what was their marketing plan And we would make suggestions. Some of the kids had great ideas, but then it was, what else could you do? Because some of the kids were like, well, we're going to be on the Facebook page of Community Futures because they're going to put it out. And I said, okay, but that's only going to hit their people. What are you going to do to get it out? Could you ask mom and dad? Could you ask grandma and grandpa? Could you ask these other people? Who can you ask that's going to help you promote your business? Who do you know? So could you do up a card and give it to your teacher? Could you give it to your bus driver? Could you pass it around your neighborhood? How can you get out the word? There's always options on social media, but what can you do that's different? This is actually a really good example too. For years, when I first started in the travel industry, we had neighbors. They were amazing people, and they used to take their entire family, like 30 people, on a vacation every couple of years. And I really wanted in on that business. And so I remember running into them somewheres and having a conversation. And they said, one day I really want to do this. So when a new brochure came into the office that was related to that, I wrote a handwritten note, dropped it in their mailbox, and left it for them. And I did this a couple of times. Then they did reach out and they said, you know what? We really appreciate this, but just so you know, we actually work with this other travel advisor. And I said, not a problem. I'm still happy to drop these off for you whenever you need them. Well, guess what? Something happened and they needed to find somebody new to do their travel. Well, who was front of mind? Doing sales is not always an instant gratification. Sometimes you've got to play the long game. But the other thing is before I worked with them, I actually got referrals from them to their friends, because they were very loyal to who they were with, but their friends were new. So they were like, here, go talk to her, go do that, and it's really important that you give that opportunity to be able to get yourself known and get yourself out there. You need to understand what it costs to run your business. You need to know the difference between your wage and your profit. By the way, they are not the same thing. Your profit is not everything above and beyond what you've paid on your credit card statement, for your fees or this or that. You also need to draw a wage before you have profit. So it's important to understand the difference between wage and profit, understand what the costs are so that you know what it is that you need to charge for everything. And the number one way you can do that is by doing a debrief at the end. Whether you do it at the end of the quarter, end of the year, whatever it is, but make sure you're doing one so that you know, what did you spend on everything it took to get the business you got? What did you spend on your business operations? What did you spend on your overhead? What are all the things you did? And then what are the hours you put in? How much are you actually making? And if you're not keeping track, then how are you going to be able to pull it all together? But finally, here was my number one thing. It might sound a little harsh, but even as a judge, especially as a judge, if I went to a booth and the kids did not ask, would you like to buy some lemonade? I didn't buy. And for a couple of years of judging, I hardly bought any. Now, up to last year, my husband had been going with me, but he was busy last year. And so he didn't. So he bought all the time, but I didn't. And then last year I was there with a different judge, but not my husband. And I only bought lemonade 3 times out of all the booths that I visited. So this year when I went to Lemmy University, I said to the kids, I'm going to give you an insider tip. You've got to ask people if they want to buy lemonade. And they looked at me and they said, why? I said, because if you don't ask, I'm not going to buy. And last year I only bought 3 times. Well, their jaws would drop open, their eyes would bug out, and they're like, 3 times, that's it? I said, yeah. So I'm going to have enough money to buy lemonade from all of you, but I need you to ask me if I'm going to buy some. And then I need you to ask everybody else that comes to your booth. So we get to Lemonade Day, and as the judges, we all meet up in the local park so that we can get our assigned routes and everything else. We're meeting up, and I said, you know what, I'll be back in a moment. I'm going to run to the washroom. And just outside of where the public washrooms are is one of the booths. And lo and behold, he's got the big red ribbon showing that he has the best tasting lemonade. And as I'm walking across, He makes eye contact with me, and then I just see his eyes light up. And he goes, "Hello, do you want to buy some lemonade?" I said, "I'll catch you on the way back." And I come out of the bathroom and he's staring at the bathroom door. And I come out, he's like, "Are you ready to buy some lemonade now?" So by the time I met up with the other judges to get our day started, I had a big cup of lemonade in my hand, and they all kind of laughed. They're like, "You already have lemonade." I'm like, I had told them if they asked, I would buy. And he smiled like the Dickens, and he was ready to ask. And then our facilitator held up her cup. She's like, "Yep, he got me too." So here's the deal, people. There is a very good chance your clients want to buy from you. But if you're not asking them to actually put down the credit card, to actually say yes, to actually book the stinking vacation, they might still be waiting on you to ask them. I loved Lemonade Day. I loved working with these kids. I loved learning about it, but I also just genuinely loved everything that's in here in the entrepreneurship program. So if you've got littles in your household or grand littles within your family and whatnot, check it out. It takes place in June. I can't recommend it enough. I think they start registering for it probably like in March or April. But it is absolutely fantastic program. It's going to teach them everything, but also to use this as your reminder. Figure out your costs. Figure out what is your branding. Figure out what is your marketing strategy, not your tactics, but your strategy. What is your budgets? How are you going to figure out your whole year? We are just coming into Q3, which means we are halfway done the year and then some. It's your chance to get things on the right track if they're not already for this year. It's not too late. Is there things that you can change in your business to increase your profitability? If you are an entrepreneur, if you are a business owner, you are doing it for the express purpose of making money. Making money is what's going to allow you to spend some in your local economy. It's what's going to allow you to save some for yourself and your family. And it's what's going to allow you to share with those around you. Making money is not a bad thing. It's not something to be shamed about or to feel shame about. In fact, you should embrace the concept of making money and be proud of the money you get to make. Okay, until next week, we will see you then. I would love to know your thoughts on today's episode. Join me over on Instagram, or I'm also on Threads at Art of Selling Travel. But also too, if you like this episode, please rate and review this podcast. That's how it helps us to see more people. That is my ask from you today. If you have enjoyed any of the episodes, please take a moment and rate and review so that other travel advisors just like you can find it. Until next time, we'll chat later.